Hi everyone, welcome to Bonnie Caroline Makes Cards. It has been a while since I've posted, but I have been working on a series of cards that uses variations of one technique. The cards have been made in pairs and are a 2-for-1 deal using both positive and negative die cuts. Most of the dies used in this series are Simon Says Stamps Wafer dies. There is minimal stamping. In fact, some cards have no stamping at all. I began by creating ink-blended backgrounds. I varied the colors slightly for the first card, but the rest of the pairs of cards use the same colors in their backgrounds. All of the ink blending was done on Strathmore's Bristol Smooth cardstock. For the first card, I used Distress Oxide inks, dried marigold, tumbled glass in one panel and ripe persimmon in the other, and then finished off with wilted violet. For the other 4 pairs of cards, I ink blended a larger piece of cardstock. Each cardstock was then cut down into 2 smaller panels, 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches. The colors have been listed for you if you like the blend. This first card features Simon Says Stamps Fresh Daisies die cut. This pair of cards was my test piece, but I kind of liked it, so I included it in the video. I began by die cutting a white piece of cardstock using my favorite things stitched rectangles. I taped 2 of the largest dies together to create a frame. The central panel was then die cut using Simon Says Stamps Fresh Daisies and their scripty Hello die. I apologize for the next piece of footage. The sun was streaming in my window and I didn't actually think about how it was impacting my filming. I carried on enjoying the sunshine. I laid out the die cuts side by side before adhering them to the panels. One panel used all the negative die cuts, where the other one used the positive. I dabbed a little bit of glue on all the central negative pieces of the scripty hello. I popped the sentiment back into the negative space and then used my pokey tool, I don't know what it's called, to help remove those pieces. With the first panel complete, the second one went together very quickly using the positive die cuts. The background for my second pair of cards uses antique linen, vintage photo, and black soot. I began by embossing each of the 2 panels using Simon Says Stamps Leaves and Berries background stamp. Because Distress Oxide inks take a long time to dry, I did test first before I embossed using Versamark ink. I used Wow Gold embossing powder, and against this blended background it looked so beautiful and rich. After I finished heat setting both panels, I set them aside to work on my die cutting on black cardstock. For this card, I used Simon Says Stamps Outline Clustered Leaves die, a frame from the Frames die set, and the sentiment from Script Thanks. For the sentiment, I used the shadow die to die cut the black cardstock. I then die cut the Script Thanks from both gold cardstock and black cardstock. Working on the positive die cut panel first, I put Tombow glue on both the outline of the clustered leaves and the sentiment thanks. I like to use Tombow glue for fine die cuts. When it is dry, it is tacky and repositionable. The black cardstock was also die cut with a scalloped frame. Working on the negative die cut panel, I attached this outer portion of the frame to the embossed background. The rest of the die cuts were adhered to both panels and attached to a craft card base. I find working on the panels side by side easier and less confusing. My next pair of cards is a Cityscape featuring Simon Says Stamps from the Rooftop on an ink-blended background using scattered straw, abandoned coral, and seedless preserves. A Hero Arts background die was used to create the rays. Before attaching the main die cut, I used it on the other panel as a template to attach the smaller die cuts. The oval black cardstock was die cut with scripty hello, and the sentiments were adhered to both of the panels. The Cityscape was stamped on black cardstock using all three of the background colors: scattered straw, abandoned coral, and seedless preserves. For the other panel, I used those same colors to create an ink-blended background and stamped the Cityscape with VersaFine ink. Both of the stamped images were left to dry and then fussy cut on the line. In the same manner as the Cityscape, a speech bubble was stamped with the sentiment, "I miss you, I miss you, I miss you." Both the speech bubbles and the Cityscapes were mounted on black sheet foam. Before adhering the die cuts, I did some touch-ups with the black felt pen on the edges to cover up my cutting imperfections. The foam-backed images were then adhered to the background, completing this pair of cards. These next cards feature Simon Says Stamps, Pretty Peonies background, and Dahlia frame wafer die. Before working on the background, I die cut the frame out of both panels. With the red rubber background stamp directly on my media mat, I inked it up using the background colors Cracked Pistachio, Peacock Feathers, and Blueprint Sketch. I carefully laid the white panel onto the stamp and then covered it with paper towel so I wouldn't get my hands inky. I made sure that I applied even pressure, as stamping this way is a one-shot deal. After cleaning and drying the background stamp, I applied Versamark ink for the ink blended panel. Again, I took my time applying pressure so that I would get a good even impression. The panel was embossed with Wow white embossing powder. Heat setting a full panel does take a bit of time. After I thought I was done, I tilted the panel towards the light and could easily spot the bits and pieces that I missed. With both panels side by side, I started laying out the die cuts from Dahlia frame. Both of these smaller panels were then mounted on white sheet foam and trimmed. A little bit of tape was used to hold the die cuts together to make this process easier. I used a cute little die cut from Impression Obsession, ribbon and bow, to wrap around the bottom of each of the panels. The sentiment die cut, Love You by Simon Says Stamp, was adhered vertically along the side of the opening. Both panels were then attached to A2 sized card bases. I always use Nina Solar White 110-pound cardstock, as I find it is a sturdy base for my cards. Both cards are finished up by attaching the foam raised panels. My final pair of cards features Simon Says Stamps, Sunflower Stem, and It's Your Day Sentiment, all on a background by W+9 Trellis. The trellis die was used to cut both white cardstock and the background that was ink blended with worn lipstick, shaded lilac, and Blueprint Sketch. After attaching the trellises to the opposite background, they were trimmed. I then worked on the small sentiment panels using Simon Says Stamp, It's Your Day, and die cutting both white cardstock and the ink blended cardstock. The backgrounds were mounted on white sheet foam, and then the lettering was interchanged between the two small panels. Simon Says Stamp, Sunflower Stem, Wafer die was used to cut both white cardstock and the ink blended one. I attached foam squares to each of the flowers so that they would have the same dimension as the sentiment on the card base. I needed small strips of foam. When I need smaller pieces, I leave the foam square attached to the backing before cutting it. In this way, it doesn't stick to your scissors. The trellis background was adhered to an A2 size card base. After attaching both the flower and the sentiment, these pair of cards were wrapped up. So there you have it, 10 cards using variations on one technique, positive and negative die cuts. Although it is always fun to receive new products and to work with them, I have to admit I am enjoying revisiting some of my old favorites. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I thank you so much for your visit.